Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, as we consider everything happening around the world today, we shouldn't be surprised to learn that the doomsday clock is now informing us that the world is closer to annihilation than it's ever been before. Now, if you aren't familiar with this doomsday clock, it's actually a project that was created back in 1947 by a group of atomic scientists who wanted a way to warn the world about how close we are to destroying our world with dangerous technologies of our own making. Well, you might like to know that it was earlier this week when the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists in charge of the doomsday clock, they informed us that they were adjusting the time on the doomsday clock as they moved it forward from 100 seconds to midnight to 90 seconds until midnight. Now, just to be clear, midnight, well, this represents Armageddon. So, in effect, we've moved 10 seconds closer to Armageddon. That's right. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, we're currently living in a time of unprecedented danger as the events happening in the world today have brought us closer to a global catastrophe, and we're closer than we've ever been before. And in order to prove their point, well, it was this past Tuesday when they published a press release which presents their reasons for moving the doomsday clock forward 10 seconds. Now, in the opening paragraph of this statement, we find the following, and I quote them: "This year, the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moves the hand of the doomsday clock forward, largely, though not exclusively, because of the mounting dangers of the war in Ukraine. The clock now stands at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest to global catastrophe it has ever been." That's right. Russia's thinly veiled threats to use nuclear weapons in the Ukraine war constitute the worst nuclear development in 2022. And according to the UN Security General Antonio Guterres, well, the world has entered into a time of nuclear danger not seen since the height of the Cold War. This is alarming to say the least. A reporter named Michael Snyder was also correct to point out that both sides just continue to escalate the conflict. For example, the Biden administration is preparing now to send 31 M1 Abrams tanks in addition to billions of dollars in high-tech weaponry, all the while insisting that this doesn't really amount to an offensive threat to Russia. Not at all. Meanwhile, the German foreign minister just declared war on Russia. She spoke, before the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe on Tuesday. At the same time, the German government has decided to also send a battalion of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Russians have also decided to send a warship armed with hypersonic missiles, which is currently sailing towards the U.S. coast in a show of strength. And according to one report, this warship was spotted on radar in neutral waters of the Atlantic Ocean, where it's now sitting at an effective salvo launch distance from our eastern coast. Not only that, but I've also seen reports about this Russian frigate already conducting Zircon missile strikes against a mock enemy there in the Atlantic. It's totally alarming, to say the least. Without debate, both sides are playing a very dangerous game right now, and this is one reason for why the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, they've now decided to adjust the time on the doomsday clock as they've moved it forward from 100 seconds to midnight to 90 seconds until midnight. The same group of atomic scientists also refer to China's considerable expansion of its nuclear capabilities, which is particularly troubling, especially as we consider the way that they could soon rival the nuclear capabilities of the United States and Russia. North Korea has also stepped up its intermediate and long-range missile testing. For example, it was last March when they successfully launched an intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time since 2017. And then they followed that up with several more tests. And what's even more concerning is that it was last October when North Korea launched an intermediate-range ballistic missile over Japan. Meanwhile, U.S. officials contend that North Korea is preparing to conduct its seventh nuclear weapon test. So yeah, it's 90 seconds till midnight. I should also point out that the same group of atomic scientists also included Iran in their decision to adjust the doomsday clock. The reason for this is because Iran continues to increase its uranium enrichment capacity, which continues to bring them closer and closer to a nuclear weapons capability. And when we factor in their support for Russia's war against Ukraine, well, there's good reason for us to believe that it won't be long until Iran has nuclear weapons. And yeah, I have no doubt that they're going to probably use them against Israel, because they want to wipe Israel from the face of the map. India also continues to modernize its nuclear arsenal of some 160 warheads with new delivery systems that are now under development. And then there's Pakistan, which has an arsenal of similar size to India. And not only that, but they also continue to expand their warheads, their delivery systems, as well as fissile material production. Without debate, we are living in a time when the threat of nuclear war is greater than ever before. And when we factor in failing economies, climate change hysteria, the misuse of disruptive technologies, and the threat of bioweapons that can easily be released on the world, resulting in biological events like a pandemic. Well, it's no wonder that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists just decided to adjust the time on the doomsday clock. And listen, when it comes to this concern, they aren't alone. As a matter of fact, it was just last month when Pew Research released a report regarding our concerns here in America regarding the end of times. And according to their research, 39% of all U.S. adults believe that we are currently living in the end times. That's right. Almost 40% of U.S. adults are certain that we are living in the last days. This, of course, includes 55% of Protestants, 63% of evangelicals, and 31% of mainline church members. And as we consider the convergence of events that line up with biblical prophecy, I must insist that the evidence certainly seems to support this belief that these are the last days. Just think about it for a second. Israel has become a fruitful fig tree according to the Ezekiel 37 prophecy, and the Ezekiel 38 confederation is already forming as we're watching, Russia and Iran and all the nations listed in Ezekiel 38 coming together, and then also the technology exists for some sort of implanted mark which can be used to regulate a global economy according to the prophecy about the mark of the beast. And not only that, but the great apostasy is already happening right before our very eyes as more and more churches begin to embrace woke ideologies. Meanwhile, the globalists are promising peace and safety as the signs of sudden destruction are clearly upon us. In light of these things, I'm completely convinced that we are quickly approaching the end of the church age. And with that being the case, I encourage every Christian to remember what Jesus said in Luke chapter 21. It's there where he declared, "Now, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads because your redemption draws near." In other words, when we begin to see the signs of the end times unfolding before our very eyes, this should serve as a reminder that it's time for the church to look up. This is time for the church to realize that it won't be long before we are caught up into the clouds in the blessed event that we call the rapture of the church. With that being the case, I encourage you to embrace the instructions that Paul presented in Colossians chapter 3. It's there where he declares, "If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above and not on the things here on the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth: fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." Christian, listen, rather than wasting the rest of the time that we have here on earth living for the lusts of the flesh, instead let's set our minds on things above so that we can spend the rest of our time here serving our Savior Jesus. And as we seek those things which are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God the Father, the Lord will then help us here to serve him as we fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.